Back in the day, it was very easy to choose which job in the military you wanted. You could choose guy who rides horse or guy who doesn't ride horse. And this held true for thousands of years, until we invented the internal combustion engine, and then things started getting complicated.
Ever since military started using vehicles in the 20th century to get soldiers from point A to point B, how to do that has been one of the biggest tactical problems to solve, next to intercepting nuclear missiles and how to keep your wife from leaving you mid-deployment.
Today, the solution to that problem is called the modern Infantry Fighting Vehicle class of vehicles. While today's version have more technology crammed into them than the platform can even handle, how we ended up at these super battle taxis is a crazy story, involving a lot of burnt out hulls and very angry mechanics.
World War II saw the introduction of large-scale combat operations centered around vehicles. Germany's Blitzkrieg and Patton's tank battles in Africa give us some of the best examples. Vehicles generally go faster than people, especially if those people are loaded down with dozens of pounds of gear, but in order for the vehicles to be effective, the infantry that's supporting them has to be able to keep up somehow. The downside is that your average cargo truck, even today, can't withstand the punishment of small arms fire and artillery shrapnel, without pink mist and everyone in the back. Open-top trucks are great for cinematic purposes, but not great if you're like me and enjoy your blood being inside of your body.
This led to the development of things like the American and German half-tracks, which combine the mobility of both wheels and tracks while keeping the troops inside somewhat decently protected. Other platforms like the British Universal Carrier or the various repurposed Kangaroo vehicles were also used with pretty good effect. After the war ended, countries realized that more dedicated vehicles designed to carry infantry around would be created, and this led to the Armored Personnel Carrier or APC class of vehicles. Across the board, these were leaps and bounds better for survivability against incoming fire than the ad hoc designs they replaced, but they also had an issue. Vehicles like the American M59 and the Soviet BTR were great at getting guys from one place to another, but they were built with the idea that once they dropped their buddies off, they would go back to the rear. Most only had relatively light weaponry like the machine gun on top, but that was mostly for defense of the vehicle if it got into a sticky situation.
What militaries needed was something that had the perfect mixture of speed, protection, and most importantly, firepower. A concept in the 1950s that was then coined the Infantry Fighting Vehicle, and ever since then we have been arguing in internet comment threads about what the actual definition of a tank is. The Germans at the time had developed the HS-30, an APC-style vehicle with a 20mm autocannon designed to engage targets too big for the infantry to take on, but smaller than what the actual tanks would want to focus on. This was a revolutionary concept, however, a lot of mechanical issues added in with some political scandals meant that the design didn't really spread how you'd expect it to. The Soviets had looked around and realized that it would make a lot more sense for their own APCs to stay and fight. If they're going to go through the effort of paying for building and then bringing these hulking war machines to the front, it made sense to keep them around for some extra firepower as opposed to just sending them back where they can wait around for the lines to move forward again. Additionally, as the threat of nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare grew as the Cold War started heating up, being able to keep troops in a protected compartment away from those dangers made a lot more sense.
That led to the beginning of what would become the famous BMP, the first naturally being the BMP-1, or whatever this is in Russian. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. These first went into production back in 1966 with a total crew of 3. The gunner, driver, and commander. It could carry an additional 8 proud communist conscripts in the back. It had a top speed of about 40 miles per hour, meaning it could keep up with any tanks that it sent along forward with it. It was also fully amphibious, meaning it could cross small bodies of water without having to take a bridge that might be set for an ambush, or wait for river crossing assets to arrive. Soviet doctrine relied on speed and aggression, so while the armor was relatively thin, it came packed with firepower. This kept speed and maneuverability high while keeping logistical load to a minimum. Plus, if you build tens of thousands of them, losing a handful here and there isn't that really the end of the world. In a small one-man turret, you would find a 73mm 2A28 gun, able to poke targets out to 500 meters accurately, along with a coaxial PKT machine gun and a 9M14 ATGM for those pesky capitalist pig tanks, am I right? comrades? While it was incredibly cramped for the infantry in the back, the ammo would explode if hit in the right place. The armor could be penetrated by machine guns, and the anti-tank missiles were close to useless. It revolutionized combined arms warfare. Even today, you'll find modernized BMP-1s in active use all over the place. The world is lousy with them. They first saw combat in the 1973 Yom Kippur War by Egypt, who had purchased a fleet of them from the USSR. While they were great at moving troops around, the 73mm cannon and already obsolete missiles were both underpowered and inaccurate. The Israelis nicknamed them the Coffin for Seven Brothers because of how easily they were destroyed. I was recently informed that Israel nicknamed my Toyota Corolla the sedan for one fool, and I don't really know how to take that, honestly. That hurts. But during the BMP-1's deployment during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, it also started facing some additional issues. The larger, slow-firing gun was struggling against the sporadic long-range infantry fighting in the country. Additionally, the gun lacked a good bit of elevation, and the Mujahideen quickly realized all they had to do was be at a high enough angle, and the BMP would just be a sitting duck on the ground.
What resulted from these lessons was the legendary BMP-2, which first was introduced back in 1980. While still a cramped metal death trap for all involved, it introduced the 30mm 2A42 autocannon as the main armament, and upgraded the launchers to fire the 9M113 Conqueror's ATGM. The smaller but faster firing stabilized cannon made it ideal for dynamic engagements, able to hit targets up to 3 kilometers away. Additionally, the ability to switch between ammo types just on the fly made it a very flexible platform that was able to engage a lot of different targets at once. Plus, the switch from a one-man to a two-man turret. Not only did the switch from a one-person turret to a two-person turret keep the gunner from getting a little too lonely, it allowed the commander to have better eyes on the battlefield and command and control of the whole thing. Since its introduction, over 55,000 have been built, with the Soviets licensing the design of these things to basically anyone who wanted it. In fact, twice as many BMP-2s have been built by foreign countries as opposed to the Russians who actually made the design. They're cheap, they're reliable, and firmly in the good enough category of infantry fighting vehicles. The BMP-2 will absolutely go down in history as one of the IFVs of all time. As the United States saw what the Soviets were pumping out of their factories, they looked at their own APC, the M113, looked at the BMP, and realized they had a little bit of a problem.
The American M113 was the most widespread APC at the time, and somehow still is. Please just let it die with dignity. But that vehicle had the same issues as other similar platforms at the time. It lacked the protection and firepower to be a real frontline fighting vehicle. The United States Army at the time was going through a massive modernization program with things like the M1 Abrams, the Apache attack helicopter, and Patriot missile launcher also in the works. One of those projects was the M2 Bradley. The development of the Brad started way back in 1963 under the MiG V-65 program, a direct response to the Soviet BMP-1's development. Despite that, it wouldn't really gain traction until 1973 as the XM723, which eventually became the XM2 and XM3, and finally the M2 and M3 Bradley models. These started production in 1981 and hit the fleet in 1983. Now, despite what the Pentagon Wars taught you, the goal was always for it to be an infantry fighting vehicle, not just another armored personnel carrier. The fighting part of the name came in the form of the M242 25mm chain gun, the 25 Mike, and a tow missile launcher on the side. Add in the coaxial M240 machine gun, and you had a platform that could basically kill anything and everything at least twice.
Now, one design element found on both the Bradley and the BMP that probably deserved getting made fun of by Hollywood executives was the idea of portholes that people can stick their guns out and shoot from. The idea was that since situational awareness ain't the greatest inside of armored vehicles, having the dismounts in the back looking out the sides would help alleviate some of that. Additionally, in case one side decided to go ham with the old chemical warhead arsenal, troops would be able to safely stay inside the protected hull and still lay down some sweet scunion. For the Americans, that took the form of the M231 port firing weapon, an open bolt modification of the classic M16. designed to be screwed into the portholes of a Bradley and fired from the inside. The shooter would aim by looking through a periscope and adjusting their shots using the tracer ammunition coming out of the front end of the barrel. The rate of fire on these bad boys was an eye-watering 1,225 rounds per minute, because the opportunity to actually engage your target while in a moving vehicle is very small. However, that was also their biggest drawback, because these things only fired out of 30-round magazines. Troops would have to reload before the empty brass even hit the floor. Turns out that emptying your mag in half a second without actually being able to aim while your vehicle is going 30 miles per hour in rough terrain leads exactly to 0 rounds hitting the desired target.
Brads got their first combat experience in Desert Storm, where a combination of their armor-piercing rounds and tow missiles led them to destroy more Iraqi vehicles than the actual American Abrams tanks sent over. The Brits by this time had developed their own IFV, the Warrior, and the Germans fielded the Martyr 1, the other Martyr 1, and the French used the AXM-10P. Then the Cold War ended and we all decided to put our differences aside, hold hands, and ride off into the sunset on our respective infantry fighting vehicles, except not really. As militaries around the world became less centralized in their formations, the role of the IFV has grown to one of, if not the most decisive pieces of equipment on the battlefield. This is due to their unique combination of rapid-fire cannons that can kill anything except a tank, ATGMs which can kill tanks and the infantry in the back that can usually kill anything, but they're going to complain the entire time about it. That growing role led to the new platform and upgrades that put their Cold War counterparts to shame.
The United States is now on the 4th major iteration of the Bradley, the M2A4, while other upgrades added on things like additional armor, a commander sight, and improved optics. The A4 model specifically completely digitizes the vehicle, while improving the tracks, suspension, and engine performance. The Russians have also pushed their own designs, with the BMP-3M being the latest iteration, with better firepower, mobility, and protection than its predecessors. A big part of that firepower piece came in the form of its 100mm cannon, which lets it take on more hardened targets, like bunkers and buildings. Europe's fleet of IFVs is now just as diverse as their excuses for not having air conditioning in the 21st century. Swedish CV90s, which started as a domestic design, are now being fielded by more and more militaries. The General Dynamics Ajax has been adopted by the UK for certain roles, and is being eyed by other EU armies looking to upgrade their fleet. There's also the Ascod, the Borsuk, and the Dardo, and all of them are zipping around Europe's picturesque countryside. China currently uses the ZBD-04 IFV, which, interestingly enough, still allows troops to stick their guns out from the inside and shoot. What no actual war does to a mother. These have the same style weapon systems as the BMP-3, with a 100mm cannon, 30mm gun, and a 7.62 coax. However, the ammo has been tweaked a bit by the old PLA. Russia, on top of its BMP series, also has a set of IFVs specifically for its airborne forces known as the BMD. The latest iteration, the BMD-4, has the same triple gun turret as the BMP-3, but since it was designed to be thrown at the back of a cargo aircraft, it has armor that is only marginally thicker than the construction paper that I used to enjoy eating as a child.
Over the years, different countries have adopted different strategies based on whichever vehicle they decided to build and or buy for their respective military. In the United States, the Bradley is essentially the heavy weapons squad. Troops dismount before reaching an objective and the vehicle moves up, providing supporting fire while the infantry hits the flanks. British doctrine leans a bit more evenly with their IFVs and infantry supporting each other at the same time, depending on the situation. Germany leans a bit more cautious with their fighting vehicles, with the infantry pushing farther ahead of the vehicles than their allies and bringing up the big guns as needed to deal with specific targets. Sweden takes America's doctrine and flips it, with their CV90s being the decisive element, while the infantry are meant to support and protect it from things like Russian anti-tank teams. Finally, the Russians, being the Russians, take a different and more aggressive approach, at least according to their doctrine. Don't look at real-world examples for this. If you're in a BMP, again, according to doctrine, your goal is to assault as far as possible onto an objective, only kicking out your infantry at the last possible second in order to emphasize a shock and awe style of attack, which we have seen here and there in Ukraine. Real world, that hasn't always worked out super great though, and leads to a lot of dudes scrambling out of a track only after a BMP hits a mine. The idea of the IFV is pretty simple. Armored hull that can carry a squad-ish of dudes, a medium caliber gun that can fire a combo of high explosive and armor-piercing rounds, and an optional AT launcher for targets that needed to be AT launched. But one new design philosophy has really begun taking over the future of the vehicle: unmanned turrets.
Like all design decisions, not having someone actually in the turret has its own pros and cons. The crew generally have slightly worse situational awareness because they're slotted lower down, and fixing weapon malfunctions becomes a lot more complicated as a process. However, since threats are coming from this direction now, not so much this direction now, it makes a little bit more sense to put your crew a little lower to the ground. Unmanned turrets also open up more space in the hull to fit more people in the back. The Bradley is a bit infamous for only being able to carry 6 troops in the hull, so platoons had to split up their formations just to get everyone loaded up. The United States has been leaning in towards the MCT-30, a turret design that's already been placed on the Wheeled Striker APC and on the Marines' new ACV. These also started getting tested on the new AMP-V platform, which means we spent millions of dollars just to figure out how to take the turret off of a Bradley, only to then wait a few months and try to put another one on top. Germany's Puma uses a very cool looking unmanned turret, and countries buying the CV-90 are testing out their own versions of remote controlled autocannons. Russia has developed the Boomerang BM turret for their latest fleet of armored IFVs like the T-15, but we have yet to see those anywhere except a parade or a state-produced hype video. Because you can basically slap an unmanned turret onto anything that can physically handle the weight, a lot of countries are taking their wheeled APC designs and turning them into wheeled IFVs. These don't quite have the protection in terms of armor compared to dedicated infantry fighting vehicles. That said, trying to decide if you want a free 30mm autocannon or don't want a free 30mm autocannon is like trying to decide if you want a free crisp $100 bill or, I don't know, lick the bathroom floor in a public restroom. Seriously, I tried for like 10 minutes to come up with a better simile than that, but it's been a long day. That's all I could come up with.
Most new IFVs are being tested with an airburst munition, both as a way to counter troops behind cover, but also to try to defend against modern vehicles' biggest threats: drones. Right now, new developments in counter-UAS platforms is being developed to try to keep the vehicle carrying troops in one piece and ideally not on fire. The American Skunk Works division of Lockheed Martin is currently using the Marine ACV-30 as a testbed for organic drone jamming tech on vehicles. Other platforms like the latest batch of CV-90s are being integrated with automated drone tracking and detection, which would leverage airburst rounds to automatically eliminate any UAV threats as they're spotted. Obviously, neither of these will completely eliminate drones as a viable danger point, but it's better than hoping a dude in the back gets a lucky shot with his rifle. For the United States, the days of the Bradley reigning supreme are coming to a close. Right now, the Army's deciding between selecting the Rheinmetall Lynx or the General Dynamics Griffin III as the basis for their XM30, the new next generation of American IFVs. I know I speak for both of us when I say that I am confident the creation of the XM30 will be quick, efficient, and by no means go over budget.